Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple tips and tricks for a subcuticular pattern because that is one of the hardest patterns that there are. First thing is how you're holding your instrument. You need to be out on the tips of your fingers, okay? And if you're having a hard time holding it like this and you really, really want to put it up like that, you really need to work on having it in your fingertips. And that might mean having like a little bit of counter pressure. Because see, look how much I can rotate my needle just with my fingers. And so that's really important if you're manipulating suture. The other thing you can do is with this finger free, you can actually hold your suture away from your skin incision so that you can help control your suture just a little bit. Now make sure you don't get it all tangled so that when you let go you jerk your suture back out, but it can help. Okay, so the first is the first knot, which has to be buried. So I'm going to go deep to superficial on my side because that's the easy way for my hand to rotate, and all of these needles are curved, and so we're going to rotate as opposed to push the needle through. All right, so that's deep to superficial, coming out right under the epidermis. So this should be in the dermis, but under the epidermis, because that's the holding layer of the skin. So now, because I'm going to go on the other side, I need to rotate so that my needle is pointing that direction, or away from me. And so I'm going to hold my suture with one hand and rotate my needle. And you'll notice I actually took my fingers out a little bit to even get a little bit more rotation. That's okay. And I'm going to use my needle as a manipulator and go superficial to deep. All right, now I'm going to look at it again and say, hey, is that where I wanted it? Okay, it is, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it through. So you cannot see that line of the suture, and it's in the holding layer. So now I'm going to pull it to where this guy is manageable. If you have him super long, it's hard to make that knot. So I'm going to make him manageable, put my needle holders in the middle, go over the top, grab my end, and pull. Middle, over the top, grab my end, and pull. Now you will find that your knot sinks down better if you pull the same direction as the incision is. So parallel to the incision as opposed to this way, I'm pulling it that direction. Okay, so I do my 4th rows. Now I got to cut this guy, my tail, so that he stays low. So now my knot is low, and if I'm just sitting here like this, you can't see my knot. If I pull on my needle though, I can make you see my knot if I pull on my needle. And so that's what happens. A big mistake beginners with subcuticular patterns make is that my knot is deep, but if I start now with my needle superficial, it pulls the knot back up to superficial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start deep for my first suture, again on my side because that's the easiest, and I go deep to superficial again. And now my suture is superficial. All right? Now, there's 2 ways to do a subcuticular pattern. One is horizontal, which is actually going in this direction. So horizontal, and that was too deep, my exit was. And you can go across horizontally, which in my opinion is the easier way. If you pick up the subcutaneous tissue, in this suture pad it's hard to show you, but if you pick up the subcutaneous tissue or the junction between the subcutaneous tissue and the dermis, you can stretch this skin out a little bit and get a little bit easier time of putting it right where you want it. Okay. And then the other method is that you can still do it vertical. So you can do superficial to deep, deep to superficial, superficial to deep, deep to superficial, all the way along as well. That's the other way you can do it. Now I tend to not use my forceps as much on the skin. It bruises the skin, but especially when you're learning, you tend to need to use your forceps on the skin a little bit more or on that subcutaneous skin junction. The other thing that makes this easier is the more perpendicular you are to the skin when you make your initial incision, the easier this is. If you make a little bit of a incision that is a little bit more cattywampus or angled, one side of the dermis is going to be thicker than the other. And that makes it really hard on the side of the thin dermis. Now, one other thing that people do is, like, see where I'm coming out right there? They'll come and their next throw, because they're stretching the skin, or their next suture will be down this way. And then that's not tight enough. So I'm going to put one in a little bit further down than it should be. And you can see that if it's down there, it's going to want to squinch this up. Oh, it tore right through, or tear right through. But what will happen if you do that is when you pull it, this side will then squinch up like that. Now, is that a disaster? No. You can take it out. You can also, sometimes you can make up for, if this one was a little bit long, then on the next time I go, I just back it up a little bit. So if this right here is coming out on this end, then I just back it up a little bit to make it a little bit shorter on this end, and you can straighten out some of those mistakes like that. The other mistake people make is that it's a curved needle. So every time you stick it in the other end of the skin, it's a curved motion, so you rotate your wrist, you don't push the needle through. All right, now what we're going to do is we are going to bury the last knot, and to do that you need everything to be deep. So you need this line, which is now coming out superficial, you need it to be deep. So how am I going to get this to be deep? Well, if it's on the opposite side, I can go deep to, or superficial to deep on the opposite side. I typically don't like doing that. I don't know why. It's probably just me. But I like coming on my side first. That's where I ripped it. I had to go away from my rip there. And then, so now I'm superficial on my side so that I can go superficial to deep on the other side. So see how deep that is? This is not like barely deep. This is not like a millimeter deep. This is deep. You want that sucker to turn upside down and live upside down, so it has to have room to be upside down, okay? All right, so that's my first deep line. Now I'm going to go deep to superficial. All right, so now I have a deep loop. Now, the second mistake people do is they try to tie to this loop. But this guy, my needle side, is superficial. So if you do that, you'll keep the knot facing up at the superficial side. Everything has to be deep. So I'm going to go on the other side here. Again. Ooh, I was too superficial that time, starting out. So I repositioned, and I need to go superficial to deep again. Okay? So now I'm going to pull this through, and here's another mistake that I just made. So here is my loop that I'm going to tie to. There is the strand that just went across. If I try to tie over the top of this strand right here is superficial, and it'll keep my knot superficial. And so my knot will still stay. So you need everything on the same side. So I'm going to pull my loop over here to this side. If I don't tangle it here. There we go. I'm going to pull my loop on to my same side that I'm going to tie to. All right? Now I could have gone either way. I could have taken the needle onto the other side. They just need to be on the same side. All right. So now it's just a normal tie. Now you can see it already wants to stay deep, right? But I am going to snip that guy, snip that loop. I left my tags just a little bit long so you could still see them sticking out of there. See right there. So now I think, if they're sticking up like that and it didn't completely turn upside down, what can I do? Well, I can smurf it. So what I'm going to do is I have to go in the same hole. So if I come in just adjacent to the hole, then this guy is going to be over the top of that tissue and diving in, so it's going to be pulling the knot up. You have to go in the exact same hole and then out of the skin, deep to the knot, and then it flips the knot upside down. So the knot's upside down. Then you pull this tight. So you don't want to be loose. You want to pull it tight and then cut it right adjacent to the skin. It should pull the suture back in, and you're golden. Everything's buried. That was longer than 3 minutes. That was forever.